Hello, I'm coming to you once again from my office in the Rayburn House office building across the street from the Capitol. It's a beautiful day in Washington, but I can honestly and sincerely tell you that I would rather be in East Tennessee on a bad day as to be in Washington, D.C. on a beautiful day, especially considering the fact that my wife, my children, my grandchildren are all there in East Tennessee with my constituents. I want to read a quote from Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, and of course he was considered to be a very liberal politically, but he said the role of government is to stabilize and then get out of the way as quickly as possible. Ultimately, the recovery will be led not by the government but by industry, business, and the creativity, ingenuity, and enterprise of people. And then he added to this, speaking to government officials. He said, if the measures you take in responding to the crisis diminish their incentives, curb their entrepreneurship, and make them feel unsure about the climate in which they are working, the recovery becomes uncertain. And I can tell you that I think more of our government officials should hear those words. And I'm especially concerned for several reasons. One is, we seem to be in sort of a temporary or a blip of a recovery at this time, but it's based almost entirely, the experts say, on pent-up demand. People who have held off for 3 or 4 years in buying a car or in expanding their homes or buying new homes and so forth. And so if we're going to have a recovery that's more than just temporary, we've got to do several things. Our recession and our economic problems have been caused primarily because of two things. Too much debt, both government and personal, and overregulation of our economy. I would like to read to you something that a banker in Knoxville sent to me recently. And this is even more timely than when I first received it, because unfortunately we had a bank that was taken over by the FDIC recently there in Knoxville. And this is a letter that I received from a banker connected to another bank, not the one that had the problems. But this banker wrote to me this. He said, one of the single greatest needs of small business is access to capital, and much of that small business lending capital typically is provided by America's more than 6,700 community banks. Yet community banks are by and large being forced to withhold and constrain lending at the time America needs it most. This is largely due to unprecedented, onerous regulatory constraints being placed on community bankers by federal bank examiners. And this Knoxville banker goes on, never in modern history have banks, especially community banks, been under greater pressure by banking regulators. Much of that pressure is unprecedented, virtually ignoring or redefining historic standards and definitions of bank examining. Routinely, banks are being required by bank examiners to classify and put into a non-accrual status loans that are current on their payments. In many banks, this can be far more than half of all their classified loan assets. This is enormously inconsistent with historic bank examination practices. In most cases, this results in a bank's capital being constrained and consequently may well lead to a forced merging of these banks by the Fed into the larger banks. Despite acknowledgement by the Fed that the two big banks represent a systemic threat to the U.S. and global banking system, the big banks seemingly are allowed to keep getting bigger. And he closes in this way, this Knoxville banker. He says, if America is going to have economic recovery and jobs depend on it, banks must not only be allowed to lend, but encouraged to lend. Instead, they are largely being constrained from lending, with much of that constraint attributable to overly aggressive bank examinations. By and large, most U.S. banks are having to shrink in size in response to the Fed's pressure, which translates into reduced lending. And this is something that I've heard from bankers and business people all throughout East Tennessee. And you remember that East Tennessee has been one of the most popular places to move to in the whole country for about 40 years now, and our economy there is really quite a bit better than it is most places in the country. But if we allow the banking regulators to just say no, 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 at the time the President and the Secretary of the Treasury are saying, encouraging lending, that is a bad sign for our future and a bad sign for economic recovery. In addition, the Federal Reserve has apparently made the decision that we have too many banks. And so what they're doing, they're forcing a lot of these smaller and community banks out of existence, or either being forced to merge. And that's not good either, because we've started the recession that we've been through because we let certain banks and financial institutions get so big that they were considered to be too big to fail. I voted against the bailouts that took place roughly 3 years ago, and I don't think that we should ever allow any banks or other businesses to get too big to fail so that taxpayers are required to come in and bail them out. And I think the economy will be much better over the longer haul if we will go much more toward the free market system that we seem to be getting away from in this country today. Thomas Donahue, the national president of the American Chamber of Commerce, said at a job summit here in Washington last year that the regulatory environment going on in this country today for all types of business was so far in excess of and beyond anything that had ever been done in the history of this country that we were in great danger of becoming a government of, by, and for the regulators instead of, by, and for the people. If we're going to get away from that and have a strong economy and have loans available for home builders, realtors, and small business people, we have got to change the direction that too much government has caused us to go in this country. And that's one of the things that I'm working on here in Washington. Thank you.